It was the non-tender deadline on Friday. The Dodgers made some moves, some that might make some Dodger fans unhappy, some that will make them a little more happy. And there was an intriguing rumor about Juan Soto. We're going to dig into all that and more. Let's get live on Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks to our everydayers for being with us every weekday morning, and thanks to those of you who are with us live here on Sunday evening. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. And please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now to make it easier to find. If this is your first time with us, my name is Jeff Snider. My normal co-host is Vince Semperia, although it's just me today. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like most of you. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room over the last decade. So we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And get started we will here on Locked On Dodgers. Thanks for being with me, my fellow World Series champion fans. This was an interesting weekend. There was news that maybe felt bigger than it was. And the big news that Friday was the non-tender deadline, which means, I guess I'll give a quick summary of what that means. There's guys who haven't yet or who haven't yet reached free agency, players who haven't reached free agency yet. Every year the team has to make a decision. Are we giving this guy a contract? The term they use for legal reasons is tender. Are we tendering him a contract? And Friday was the deadline to decide. If we're not, we need to decide that. And usually it's arbitration guys who are eligible for arbitration. The most notable one in recent memory for me was Russell Martin in 2010. The Dodgers non-tendered Russell Martin. I remember it because Russell Martin was my favorite Dodger at the time. And then they non-tendered him, and then they signed Juan Uribe, who at the time was my least favorite player in baseball. And I thought, man, they're really testing this loyalty thing. And they ended up getting Russell Martin back, and I ended up liking Juan Uribe just fine. So it was okay. But basically, sometimes teams in the position of the 2010 Dodgers, where, we're not rebuilding, but, we're actually worrying about money because Dodgers at the time were owned by a terrible owner who was bleeding the team dry. Or if there's teams that just are watching money, they're not going to be competing. What's the point of paying this guy $14 million in arbitration or whatever? Players get non-tendered all the time. Hardly ever for the Dodgers, at least the guys who are eligible for arbitration. And that was the same this year. We did get word two players who were eligible for arbitration already settled with the Dodgers. That was Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin. Both of them settled, so they are under contract for next year. There were, six others, I think. Michael Kopech, Bruce Dark-Graterol, Evan Phillips, Gavin Lux, Alex Vesia, Anthony Bonda. All those guys are still eligible for arbitration, which we'll talk more about as that time comes. They will all end up settling, I'm sure. The Dodgers aren't going to go arbitration with any of these guys. They're going to come to an agreement. But on Friday, they made a decision, yes, these guys are going to be on our team next year. We are giving them a contract, I guess. They're not guaranteed they're going to be under contract next year. They could still trade any of these guys. But the two guys who they did non-tender were two guys who weren't yet eligible for arbitration. That's Zach Logue and Brent Honeywell Jr. Logue is not surprising at all. Zach Logue, he pitched a little bit for the Dodgers, wasn't good. When you look at the other guys, the Dodgers had a roster crunch because all the guys who were on the injured list last year, injured list goes away at the end of the season. And so all these guys who were hurt, who were expecting back at some point in the 2025 season, are back on the roster. And the Dodgers just didn't have room for a guy like Zach Logue, who just isn't good enough to be there. Unfortunately, the same thing applies to Brent Honeywell Jr. And I did see a report, one person, I can't remember who it was, but somebody who knows about these things says a lot of times when pre-arbitration guys get non-tendered like this, they often end up re-signing with the same team just on a minor league deal. And I'm sure the Dodgers would be open to re-signing Brent Honeywell on a minor league deal. That would mean he's not on the 40-man roster. He would, have to earn a spot. But there's also a chance that Honeywell might have, might want to go test free agency, might have teams interested in him. It's interesting because, I talked a lot about Honeywell late in the season about how he just didn't fit on a postseason roster. And then injuries forced their hand, and turns out they needed to have Brent Honeywell on their roster to fill that role of innings eater who wasn't good, but could throw 50 pitches in an inning when necessary, which unfortunately became necessary. I don't know if that's the kind of, the quote unquote success that Brent Honeywell had this October. I don't know if that translates to other teams wanting to sign him because, like I said, his value is quantity, not quality. But he also, he was decent in the regular season last year. He doesn't have the strikeout stuff, which is why I was always concerned about him. But if, like Pinsanity just said in the chat, he just doesn't really fit this team. If the Dodgers have any reasonable amount of health, Brent Honeywell is not anywhere near one of the 13 best pitchers in the organization. And so it made sense for them, whether it is to re-sign him to a minor league deal or to let him go and find somewhere to play. Either way, it didn't make sense for the Dodgers to offer him a major league contract at this point because he's out of options. That's the big thing. He is out of minor league options. So if they had given him a contract, they're guaranteeing him a spot on the active roster next year, or at least guaranteeing that they're paying him for that. If they were to DFA him later, they'd still have to pay him. And so that's basically what it came down to. And this is one that I know a lot of people love Brent Honeywell Jr., and I appreciate him for what he did. I've talked about the legend of Honeywell and how he's like from Sandlot. He's not a hero, but he's a legend from this 2024 World Series. Nobody can take that away from him. But I think he's going to be more like I'm trying to think of a 1988 parallel from those stuntmen. Mickey Hatcher was loved, but it's not like he was ever a really good player. A lot of those guys. So Honeywell only time will tell if his time with the Dodgers is done. We thought his time with the Dodgers was done a few months ago when the Dodgers DFA'd him. He then re-signed or accepted the outright option or outright assignment to AAA, and they eventually put him back on the 40-man roster so they could call him back up. And like I said, injuries forced him onto the postseason roster. There's not, like, with what the Dodgers have coming back and what they're trying to do this offseason, it's hard to picture Brent Honeywell being a big part or even any part of the 2025 Dodgers. But you know what? If there's one thing we learned in 2024, it's that you never know what's going to happen with pitchers and injuries and all of that. So I like Brent Honeywell and I wish him the best. I am not sad from a baseball perspective about this move at all. I think that I think they're going to be just fine. And I'm glad that he got his moment. I'm glad he got, even that Mookie podcast last week, that Honeywell was a big part of that. Good for him. Happy for him. And the Dodgers are probably a better team without him. Now they have more open spots on the 40-man roster available. And we'll see. Like I said, they'll probably settle with those other 6 people and we'll go from there. And then we can start getting into free agency and start filling up those other roster spots with free agent signings or trades or whatever. That is going to, I think that covers it for that one. Sorry, Zach Logue. Sorry I didn't say more words about you. I did say your name probably 4 more times than I ever expected to again. So I guess there's that. But I'm going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk about Juan Soto, another polarizing topic for kind of opposite reasons. This guy's really good, and yet a lot of people don't want him. So he's basically the opposite of Brent Honeywell. And we're going to dig into an interesting rumor I read about him. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during their cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. Minimum purchase may apply. I am back. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Thanks to our everydayers. If you're not an everydayer, it's easy to become one. Just watch or listen every weekday morning. Make that easier on yourself by subscribing wherever you're watching or listening right now. You can go beyond the podcast and become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Dodgers. Text directly with us. It's a lot of fun. Just a few bucks a month with a free 14-day trial. Also check out Locked On MLB, hosted by our buddy Paul Francis Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully. And be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles, the two 24/7 streaming channels on YouTube from the Locked On Podcast Network. So there was an interesting rumor I read the other day. It was passed along in English by Ryan Spader. He was just translating a report from a guy whose name I don't remember now, who is a Spanish language guy, sport talk guy, covering the Red Sox mostly. And he said that Juan Soto will be looking for a contract of 12 to 14 years at least $45 million per year with opt-outs after the third and fourth seasons. Now, he doesn't say where he heard this, doesn't claim to have an inside source. We don't really know. So we're taking all this with a grain of salt. But I'm going to talk about that roster or that contract permutation at face value with the understanding that we have no idea if this guy knows what he's talking about. But 12 years at $45 million is $540 million. 14 years at $45 million is $630 million. So that right there passes the smell test. The, roughly the ballpark that we think Soto is probably looking for. Of course, maybe the reason that passes the smell test is because this guy just did the math the other way and said, well, we've heard that he wants about $600 million. So what's 600 divided by 13? So maybe that's where this rumor came from, is this guy just punched in the numbers on his calculator just like I did. But if that's the case, the interesting part to me is the opt-outs that he's looking for after the third and fourth years. And the reason I think the opt-outs make the Dodgers a little bit more realistic. I still think it's not super likely that the Dodgers sign Soto, but I also don't think I don't think it's crazy to think he might. And the reason is the Dodgers print money, and what their bigger concerns are the luxury tax and things like that, because as I've mentioned before, luxury tax has non-money implications. It drops you down in the draft. It drops you down in, how much international money you're allowed to spend. All those things are based on the luxury tax too. And so there are actual baseball implications to exceeding the luxury tax. If it wasn't for that, if it was just money, if it was just, we have to pay an extra percentage on everything over this amount, I think the Dodgers wouldn't care at all. But the baseball implications do change things. And so I think that that's why they're at least aware of it. Now, the Dodgers have shown they are clearly willing to go over the luxury tax. But with the contracts they already have, the long-term contracts, would they be willing to do a long-term one with Soto like that? That's where it gets kind of interesting. But because of the opt-outs, what the Dodgers could do, and this isn't a thing I just came up with. It's, I did come up with it, but I'm not the only one to come up with it, because, it's kind of logical. And so a lot of people have come up with similar ideas. But if the Dodgers were to say, okay, 12-year or 14, call it 14 years average annual value, $45 million. So 14 years, $630 million deal. But the first 4 years, we are paying you $75 million a year, for example, just throwing that number out there. So we're getting $300 million of the $630 million out of the way in the first 4 years. And then the last 10 years, it's what's that? $330 million. So the last 10 years, it's $33 million a year. Just do a straight something like that. That encourages Soto to opt out, because basically you get your big money up front. You got your $45 million average annual value, but you actually made $75 million a year. Then you opt out at age 30, 29 or 30, and hit free agency again and get another big deal. If you think you can get more than the 10 years, $330 million left on the deal, that's, then he would probably opt out. I think that might be a win-win for the Dodgers, because it drops the average annual value down. Now, it would be nicer if they could do a 25-year deal, but Major League Baseball would step in on that. Like, the Dodgers obviously would love to get the average annual value down as low as possible. And maybe, we don't know what Soto wants, if he's looking for the biggest average annual value, or if he's looking for just the biggest overall deal. Obviously, it would be second to, if you count Ohtani's, as $700 million. But we don't know what he wants. And so maybe they could say, let's do a 16-year deal and drop that AAV down even lower. At 16 years, or say 15 years, $600 million. That gets you to the $600 million mark, which nobody except Ohtani has done. And Ohtani has only done it with deferrals. It's an easy, clean $40 million a year AAV. But again, you make more up front load the contract. That way, if he plays well and he decides to opt out, great. All it costs the Dodgers was money, and they're good. If he doesn't play well enough to think he can get 10 years, 300 million, whatever, well, that's okay too, because as time goes on, you are only paying him the 30 million-ish a year after that. And so it's a little bit more affordable. And, 10 years from now, paying $30 million for a guy like Juan Soto will probably seem relatively inexpensive, all things considered. So I think that's a thing. And I saw somebody say that, where was it? I'm trying to, there are a lot of people in the chat are saying that Soto's going to go to the Mets. And he might. I have a hard time, not to say he won't go to the Mets. He'll go to the Mets if it's just about the money. The Mets, if I was a free agent and I had a lot of teams offering me so much money that I would never have to think about money again for the next 8 generations of my family, I'd probably start thinking about, okay, where do I want to live? What kind of atmosphere do I want to be in? What kind of team do I want to be on? And I have a hard time seeing big name free agents saying, yes, I want to commit to 10 to 15 years with the Mets, when the Mets have never committed to 10 to 15 years of anything. And that's where I think, and again, I'm acknowledging I'm wearing a Dodger hat, a Dodger shirt, Dodger colors. I am a Dodger fan. I acknowledge that bias. But the Dodgers are the only team in baseball that has demonstrated we are committed long-term to being successful and a winning team every single year. And that's, I would think, if you're a free agent and you are looking to play somewhere for the next decade or decade and a half, you would want to know, just like Shohei Ohtani did. The reason Ohtani took the deferrals, well, reason A is because he's one of the only players who could really afford to do that. Reason B is because he wanted the Dodgers to be able to build around him. He wanted that commitment that they are going to try to win every single year. That's what the Dodgers bring. And maybe Steve Cohen can convince Juan Soto that that's what the Mets bring too. The Mets did make the NLCS this year. Steve Cohen has talked a big game about following the Dodgers pattern of trying to win every single year. And maybe that's enough. For me, I would be much more inclined to lean towards a team that has shown the ability to do it over the team that has talked about the idea of doing it. And again, that's a biased Dodger fan approach. Now, we'll touch on this one last time before I go to the break. Do I want Juan Soto on the Dodgers? I do. I won't be heartbroken if they don't get him, but Juan Soto will absolutely make the Dodgers a better team. I think Juan Soto, I think his defense is bad. I think that his bad defense has maybe been overblown a little bit. Not to the point where it's not bad, but I do think people have taken he's bad at defense to be he's the worst defender in the history of the world. I don't think he's that bad. I think he's bad, though. I do think that he would be better with the Dodgers positioning. I think he would be better with the Dodgers coaching. I think there is potential for Soto to be an average or slightly below average defensive corner outfielder. And I think the Dodgers could absolutely live with that. The Dodgers had a poor defensive left fielder last year, and every single Dodger fan wants that guy back. And that guy, Teoscar Hernandez, is actually a good defensive right fielder. And so if they moved Teoscar to right field, put Soto in left, I think the Dodgers could be roughly as good defensively in the outfield as they were last year. And last year, I mean last season, this year, 2024, the year that the Dodgers won the World Series, I think they could be roughly as good defensively. And I think if you had Teoscar and Soto, it's a better team. It's a better hitting team. You know, whoever Teoscar ends up replacing or whoever Soto ends up replacing in that lineup, it's, plug in wherever you're moving different guys around, say replace Miguel Rojas's offense with Juan Soto's offense. That's what we're talking about here. Replace Gavin Lux's offense with Juan Soto's offense. That's kind of the trade-off we're looking at here. And so when people say, well, but he needs to be a DH, I don't believe that Juan Soto needs to be a DH right now. I think he can be a passable defensive corner outfielder. And his offense is so good. He's probably the best hitter in baseball. He's not going to hit the most home runs, but he's going to hit a lot of home runs. He's not going to strike out the least, but he's not going to strike out much. He's not going to walk the most. Yes, he is. He's going to walk the most. He is an amazing generational talent in the batter's box. And he would absolutely make this Dodgers team better. And so that's why I want him on the Dodgers. If it makes sense. I think the Dodgers have done a really good job over the last decade or so, not mortgaging the future, recognizing we are walking that line, doing the balancing act of competing every year, and not just competing, being among the best teams of baseball every year, while also having money to sign guys, building up the farm system. But if it's just money, go get them. Go get Juan Soto. And again, it's going to come down to where Soto wants to play, all of that. But I do think the opt-outs that he's rumored to want, if those are real, it maybe helps the Dodgers, because I think that he and the Dodgers then play into each other's hands that way. And it can basically be a 3 or 4 year deal, the kind of thing that they offered Bryce Harper reportedly, short-term, high AAV, plus it's the record-setting length and overall money. So it could be a win-win. I'm going to come back in a minute. We're going to talk about the Dodgers' new first base coach and a couple odds and ends. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please continue to keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And looking at FanDuel's odds for Monday Night Football, we got the Ravens against the Chargers. Ravens are minus 146 favorites to win that. We've got 2.5. They're minus 2.5 points at minus 118. So you've got, if you think the Ravens are going to win or not lose by less than 3, you got minus 118. Put your $5 bet on that. If you're right, boom, $150 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win that first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I am back. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Thanks for being an everydayer. Thanks for being live with us here on Sunday night. What else? Check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles on YouTube. Become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. All that good stuff. I saw somebody ask in the chat where Vince is tonight. Vince is just has the night off. I think he had a migraine. So being a Raiders fan will do that to you on Sundays. Hopefully Vince and I will be back together tomorrow and most of this week. A lot of stuff, we'll see. It's going to be Thanksgiving week. We'll see if it's dead on news or if we get some fun baseball news. We shall see, but that's where Vince is tonight. I am just scanning through the chat real quick to see if there's anything. I see some comments about Juan Soto and team chemistry. I've addressed that in the past. I think that Juan Soto is one of the most likable players in baseball when he was on the Nationals. And then he went to the Padres, and I think that the Padres chip on our shoulder attitude kind of rubbed off on him. But I think that if Juan Soto was teammates with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto would quickly go back to being one of the most likable players in baseball. I absolutely believe that. Dirk is complaining about too many ads and promoting the Locked On Network. Sorry, Dirk, that's what we're going to do. We are part of the network, and I'll give you a refund. Everything you paid for this episode, send me your Venmo, and I'll send it back to you. Beyond that, just digging through the chat, Juan Soto did say the Padres are giving up on games, is what EB says. It's hard to see. I like Juan Soto. And I think he would be fun on the Dodgers and look good in Dodger blue because everybody looks good on Dodger blue, in Dodger blue. Last thing, the Dodgers, as we know, Clayton McCullough was named the new manager of the Marlins, and so the Dodgers needed a first base coach. Turns out their new first base coach is their old third base coach, Chris Woodward, who was the Dodgers third base coach until he got hired to be the manager of the Rangers, is now back. Well, he's been back in the organization. He spent the last 2 years since he got fired by the Rangers. He's spent the last 2 years back in the Dodgers organization. He is now back on the major league coaching staff, coaching first base. He will be the infield coach. One of his roles in the organization the last couple of years has been roving infield instructor. And so he'll continue that work. And Dino Ebel, who has been working with infielders, will transfer more to working with the outfielders. All in all, we talked when Clayton McCullough was hired by the Marlins about how we don't really know everything that goes into being a first base coach. We know they're in charge of kind of timing up the pitchers and catchers on potential stolen bases and stuff. But, beyond that, we do know that Woodward will be involved with the infielders. And, Woodward was always a likable guy. I don't know enough about third base coaches either to know much about Woodward. But the fact that the Dodgers, well, one, he was thought well enough of to be hired by the Rangers to manage. And then that the Dodgers immediately wanted him back once he was available tells you a lot what you need to know. The Dodgers are a pretty smart organization. And I think basically the Dodgers wanting a guy is good enough for me that he's a guy the Dodgers should want. Maybe that's a circular logic or something, but that's kind of my thought. It's an interesting move to bring back your former third base coach as a first base coach. I know that the Angels in the 80s, I know that Bobby Knopp was both the first base coach and the third base coach at different times for the Angels, which I watched a lot of Angel games growing up, went to a lot of Angel games, watched games on TV just because I love baseball and Dodgers weren't always on. And so, and Angel Stadium was much easier to get to than Dodger Stadium where I lived. So it's why I still like the Angels just fine. And I get a hard time for Dodger fans for that, but they're in different leagues, literally and figuratively. So that's why I remember Bobby Knopp. I remember him as the third base coach and Moose Stubing as the first. No, vice versa. I think my main memory is Bobby Knopp at first base and Moose Stubing at third base. Moose Stubing later was a college basketball referee. He actually, when I was in college at BYU, Moose Stubing reffed several basketball games at BYU. I actually talked baseball with him a few times before games. Big dude with a nickname like Moose. You're usually a pretty big dude. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is because I know Bobby Knopp did both first base and third base coaching And I assume that some of the responsibilities are similar and some of them are different. But, a lot of a base coach, when you're not actually telling a guy, go, 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 or stay, 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 you are doing a lot of, hey, good job, and timing up the pitcher and all those things. So I have no doubt that Chris Woodward will be good in that role, and that'll be good. Gage says, wait, Jeff went to BYU? I did go to BYU. That was a long, long time ago. I see Gage's profile picture. I see blue in there. I can't tell if that's BYU blue or not. So I don't know if Gage thinks it's a good thing or a bad thing that I went to BYU. But that's, yeah. I think that's about it for me for today. We talked about Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin and Brent, Honeywell and Zach Logue. There, I said your name 5 times, Zach Logue. 6 times. Whoop, I'm done with that. We talked about Juan Soto. And I understand not everybody agrees with me on Juan Soto, and that's okay. Like I say at the end of every single episode, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. And I mean that, it's one of the fun things about talking baseball is that we don't always agree. We agree that we love the Dodgers. We want what's best for them. And we don't always agree on what that is. But I am firmly in the camp of Juan Soto as one of the best hitters in baseball would absolutely be a welcome addition on the Dodgers as far as I'm concerned. And I recognize the other concerns, but I do think they're overblown. And we talked about Chris Woodward. So that'll do it for us for today. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen, or in this case, if you're live with me, your last listen on Sunday night. If you're not an everydayer, it's easy to become one. Just watch or listen every weekday morning. You can add 1 or 2 days a week to your rotation, ease your way up to an everydayer if you need to. You can go beyond the podcast and become a Locked On Dodgers insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnDodgers. Check out Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Sports Los Angeles, the 2 24/7 streaming channels on YouTube from the Locked On Podcast Network. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at VinceSince91. I'm on Twitter at Snydog. Both of our DMs are open over there. You can also email us, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. or send us a voicemail or a text message to 323-863-LOCK 5625. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us. When you get in your car or sit on your couch, tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.